Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the DS Show. I'm joined today by a very special guest. He's been a good friend of mine for several years now in the Anaplan Ecosystem. He is the CEO of Openvale Group, my good friend, Caleb Maxson. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Thanks for having me.
So to start off, I think I always like to introduce our guests to the audience, or rather, I should say, allow them to introduce themselves. For anyone that may not be familiar, are you able to give a quick introduction of your background, maybe pre-Openvale, what you were doing, and just kind of how you got to this point?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been founded Openvale around 5 years ago in 2019 when I went back to school at UCLA. Before that, I started my career in finance transformation with Hitachi Consulting and Alvarez and Marsal, working mainly with Hyperion back then, larger companies. And then I transitioned to doing Anaplan in 2013, I want to say. So it was relatively early on. Anaplan was kind of the new toy at that point. One of the pioneers in the cloud space for planning. So did finance transformation for a bit, went to Anaplan in 2015, and then transitioned into internal finance at DocuSign and Sunrun for several years. And then I came back into consulting in 2019, founding my own thing, kind of doing the whole circle in 2019.
Yeah, and you're, I think, one of the unicorns in the space in the sense that I believe you've kind of done all three sort of stops, right? Where you've been at Anaplan, you've been on the consulting side, you've been on the customer side. Can you speak a little bit about just what each of those three experiences is like, and what kind of the differences are in the way you position yourself as, as a professional, and just kind of what each of those stops has added to your journey?
Sure, absolutely. And yes, it's something that I honestly didn't really plan initially, but kind of took shape over time. And then as I did a couple of those stops, it became clear how accretive those were to my own perspective, getting that additional perspective. Of course, starting out, it was quite technical. Coming out of school, you don't have a lot of practical knowledge at that point. You're trying to get your foot in the door, and getting those Oracle certifications was very important up front. But on those larger projects, you kind of only see a sliver of, you might be working on one submodel of a much larger model, which feeds into the P&L or feeds into the balance sheet. And, there's a lot of, for these larger companies, there's a lot of complexity in even those small slivers of the planning process. But you don't necessarily see the entire thing take shape, because those projects might take 3, 4, 5 years to actually come to fruition. So a lot of really good technical learning there. Understanding the complexity and kind of seeing where we started from, writing calc scripts in Hyperion that wasn't that long ago, doing full-on code to do very basic things, and seeing how far we've come since then is very interesting. Like getting that technical acumen early on. Then I went to a smaller shop and got to see kind of some more projects go end to end, so to speak. 6 months, 12 months, and also learning how to execute on those projects. Project management, expectation management, working with clients, very important. It's kind of core consulting fundamentals that help you get stuff done, even when there's a lot of other stuff going on. So that was really good from like a change, driving change perspective and consulting. And then going in-house, it was a completely different perspective, right? You're not up, you might do some projects, but there's many day-to-day things that are going on that are not like easy to put in a project bucket. You're working with people, you have these long-term relationships that you need to manage. Managing those personalities is much more important, and building real connections with people is much more important. And also the strategic mindset, thinking about how a company from an external perspective, those got added on when I went back in-house. And as I, started off not only doing projects, but actually leading the team as well, and working more with the management team. So it was very interesting, honestly, to see those both sides. And when we're on projects, we often have to either put on one hat or the other, depending on what the situation is. We either have to, put that consulting hat on and be like, it's of highest priority that we just get this done and stay on scope and stay on budget, or we need to put our management hat on and maybe not be so hard tied to the project timeline. Strategically, what is the right thing to do for the company? And that's how we kind of use those two perspectives on our projects.
That's very fascinating. What would you say the biggest learning has been for you? Like when you worked on site as a customer, how does that translate now to what you guys do at Openvale? Like I assume there's been some learnings you've had along the way that, you're like, you can kind of reflect back on or think back on as now, on the consulting side again, like some of those experiences you can draw on.
Yeah. In terms of like working in-house, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think in consulting, you have very clear success criteria. And it's kind of like being in school. You say, hey, if you meet these criteria, you get an A on the project and everything is good, right? And I remember this and Sunrun, we had a similar thing. We had a project and we went out and we were like, hey, we need to get our forecasting cycle times down from a few months. There wasn't really a process that would take a long time to roll up a forecast to run a scenario. And we moved to a rolling monthly forecast, which was kind of that was the thing to do, right? And we got our forecasting cycles down to 3 weeks, right? Which was a pretty big feat for a vertically integrated business like Sunrun. And we're all happy about it. We patted ourselves on the back, right? And our CFO comes in and says, "Oh, that's nice that you guys got to 3 weeks. Can you do it in 2 weeks now?" Right? And it's that mindset of like, okay, this is good, but we can do better. And you don't really see that on the consulting side as much because you're like, hey, we have a job to do. We do it and we get paid. Versus internally, though, you're like, we are always pushing the limits to try and do it even better. There's not a clear stopping point.
Yeah, and I think some of that experience, I'm sure, has contributed to a lot of your success. And I've been following you guys on LinkedIn, been noticing the tremendous growth at Openvale, and of course, congratulations on all that success. Um, if we kind of shift gears a little bit, if you put on now more of your executive hat, what, as like a team builder, what has been some of the things you look for as you're building out your team in terms of, like, here's the skill sets we need, or here's kind of the advice you would give someone who is trying to start off and build their own firm?
Well, first of all, that definitely goes both ways because I think it's been awesome seeing your guys' growth as well. And yeah, wonderful opportunity to be in an entrepreneurial position right now. I think it's extremely hard though. I definitely, when did you graduate from university, undergrad?
It's been a little over a half decade now. Yeah,
Yeah,
so lots of
there
experience.
are certain challenges like when we graduated school, right, with
Yeah.
the 2008 financial crash and everything else. I think there's a different set of challenges now for folks starting off in their career. And it's a balance of like, one, there's no moat around technical expertise anymore. So 10, 20, 30 years of experience doing something, that doesn't matter when these LLMs have only been out. World-changing technology has only been out for a year or two. And I remember that being the case when mobile first came in, and you're like, oh, nobody has experience, 10 years doing iOS development because iOS hasn't even existed for more than a year or two. And that's a really big kind of uh, playing field leveler, right? When everybody is starting in the same place from a technology perspective, that some of the big picture judgment and knowledge of having used past technologies is important. But really what we look for is the ability to learn and the willingness to learn those things, because with technology, you're kind of starting over from scratch every and I feel like that cycle is going even faster now. Every 3, 5, or 7 years, you're learning something new because you're forced to. Whatever you were an expert in before is now obsolete, or it's now, moving on to another, just going in a different direction, right? And staying at the forefront of that is very important. So that willingness to learn and having that beginner's mindset is something we prioritize a lot. On the flip side, though, like, you still need to be an expert, and I think that becomes even more important in these times, right, where AI can just pull whatever information that you need to. It's like Google on steroids. So the threshold for becoming an expert in a certain area, whether it's a certain sector or a certain growth stage of company, that threshold is even higher. And I think that's really interesting. So you're forced to learn faster on the technology side, but on the flip side, on the functional or the industry side, you're forced to invest even more over the long term.
That's really quite interesting. I think there's been a similar takeaway on my end where a little bit of a shift of philosophy on the SI side has been, hiring those who are experts in whatever it is that you're trying to hire in, right? Like, before in the past for me, I've kind of made there have been some learning moments where we've hired someone who's kind of more green or raw, right? But it takes investment from us to kind of develop that talent and whatnot. And that's not to say that learning and growing shouldn't be part of what a company's long-term plan is. But for us, especially early on, one of the things is like we got to make sure our first few hires are really good, right? And one of the things we found that's really helped us is just hiring experts in whatever it is that we're hiring, right? So that you can kind of save um, time and like some of the mistakes that you make early on in learning whatever it is you're trying to do, right? If you already have an expert in the area that's already made those same mistakes and you can draw on their experiences, that's been one of the things that's really helped us.
Finding that holy grail combination of someone who is both an expert in their area but also willing to learn, that's what we've been
Sweet
seeking. And we
spot.
saw that in Anaplan early on too, because remember a lot of people came in and failed because they had worked with Oracle or they had worked with SAP or TM1 in the past, and they came in and they weren't willing to learn the right way how to get in an Anaplan or a cloud-based mindset. And a lot of those people failed. So those people who both are an expert and willing to learn, I think that's
That's a sweet spot. Yep. Yeah.
very hard to find. So.
Yeah. And one of the things that, it's something we're trying to build in our culture too, is like the willingness to be able to adapt and adjust strategies or shift, or you're not kind of married to something or you have an ego about something or you're tied to something, right? Like, if tomorrow we drop everything and we go in a completely new direction, are you willing to kind of adapt, right, to the times? And that's something that, at least from our end, we've admired about our team.
100%. Depersonalize everything. I'm not sure how often you see with these clients, but we often hear, and people will do this and with good intent, but they'll say, "Oh, this is Caleb's model," or "This is Brian's model," and it starts to personalize things, and that's it's an interesting thing that happens. That it can be a double-edged sword in those types of situations where you need to adapt.
Yeah, certainly. And it's something too I've noticed with our clients, like as our team starts to grow, right? It's like no longer just that one person's model, no longer that one person's call that you meet every day and talk with, right? It's kind of now becoming more of a larger team. So definitely some relatability there. Yeah. Now if we were to kind of think beyond just kind of more technical, how important is it to have that? And it's something we talked a little bit about last week while we were catching up, but just having that ability to be both functional and technical.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's becoming increasingly important. Something we've heard from many clients who are kind of seeking different partners is they're like, we don't want to have to sit there and teach, our services partner how things like depreciation work or how to think about commission amortization or different things that are relevant financial fundamentals, right? Honestly, some of those on the flip side, though, is if you're coming in, you can't necessarily assume that how depreciation works at one client is the same as works with another one. So there's a very fine balance there. But yeah, folks don't want to have to start over from scratch, right? And on the flip side, even if you don't have financial experience with the tools out there now, it's much easier to, we have Google on steroids now. It's easier to kind of not have to ask questions of the client that you can easily just put into ChatGPT. So I think that being able to having some type of functional foundation and also knowing how to use tools to extend that functional foundation in real time when you're working with clients is very important.
Nice. And how important would you say then? So you have the technical, you have the functional. How important is it then also to build a team, like from a culture standpoint too? Like as you're building a company, as you're building teams, as you're onboarding new folks, how important is that culture that you're creating?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and we're seeing this not only in finance but across the board. Is a lot of consolidation and convergence of functions and roles that previously existed. So you're not necessarily seeing hard lines between sales reps and solution consultants and sales engineers, for example, anymore, or even CS folks too. You have folks who are wearing multiple hats. And you see those with the kind of the hyper growth AI companies that are coming out, they're scaling to $100 million in ARR with 20, 30, 40 people. And you don't get that when you're like, oh, well, to be able to sell, we need an AE and an SC and all these different people, a separate person to do all those different specialized things. You get that by having people wear multiple hats. And I think it's the same thing in the planning world. It's like you're not going to have a business partner and a financial analyst and a data analyst and a data scientist and data engineer. You have one person who kind of knows how to do the 80-20 on all those things. So what we're trying to kind of we're trying to not carry any of those kind of traditional separations in our teams, and we're trying to help our clients break down some of those silos anymore, where it's like there's no longer this delineation where you're either an Oracle developer or you're a finance business partner. You can be both, and that's totally possible. And it's actually not even possible. It's actually it's pretty accessible to do that now if you know where to look and you know what resources to use. And so really getting away from this black and white mode of thinking about roles and thinking about capabilities and skills is something that we prioritize and something I think will be very important in the planning space.
Yeah, for sure. Now, when it comes to like team camaraderie, like as we're kind of building these dual thread, dual functionality, folks are wearing multiple hats. How important is it that the team get along and just kind of that synergy between teams, right? Like in terms of building a team, and then on the flip side, also, have you ever had to have a difficult conversation with someone that maybe wasn't the best fit, and what is that? How do you approach those conversations, right? And just kind of your experience as a CEO.
Yeah, no, we've definitely had misses, right? And misses on our side too, where we didn't do a good enough job of kind of communicating what our direction was, or we did a pivot, right? Or there are folks that just weren't kind of the right fit. We kind of transitioned from being a more traditional consulting or like implementer type of mode with Anaplan to more of a startup mode where we're a little bit more technology agnostic. We're working with a variety of different tools. We're doing advisory services as well, but we're still very small. So it's much more of a startup type of mentality there. It's not as stable and consistent as we were before in the first few years. So that the kind of being on the same page about what our vision is. And then as we morph into more of the startup mode, very important for our whole team to understand what our vision is. Who are we targeting? What is our service? What are the principles that we're operating on? And what's the long-term end vision, right? Again, we might be focusing on FP&A today, but if things evolve the way that we believe they will, FP&A in the way that it exists today may cease to exist in many companies, right? It could become this more generalist, I don't know what you call it, just planning. It's kind of the connected planning that Anaplan like popularized, right? It's the idea of like, we are all business owners. I'm not just a finance person or an accounting person. It's everything. If that evolution continues to happen, we'll have to mold our position to adapt to that new set of business needs. So we have a path to do that, but getting folks kind of understanding what that looks like and making sure that we are meeting our clients halfway and not going off on some pie in the sky adventure has been very important. And there's a lot of tension too, and I think the tension is good because it's also the executive versus the technical type of mindset where somebody is in the weeds, understands all the intricacies, understands all the key constraints, and then you have the executive who's like, why can't we be 100% faster, right? So we always have that tension, and it creates a lot of debate, and that's something that we're kind of nurturing now because there's a lot more of that debate with what we're doing now versus what we had with Anaplan, where it's like we had 80 or 90% of it figured out, right? And we could rinse and repeat all of that. Now there's a ton of unknowns that we're dealing with.
Now, as you guys kind of embark on this pathway that you're on and this trajectory, along the way so far, have you ever had a moment or two where you've kind of felt some level of validation? We're like, okay, this seems like we're going in the right direction.
Here and there. But as we are doing our marketing, there are specific profiles where it makes sense, right? And that's the thing with planning that I think a lot of this will always be a fragmented space. because every company and every industry, every growth stage is so different. And teams just stylistically work in different ways. Some teams like to use Google, some teams like to use Excel, and that's a personal preference, and that's perfectly okay. And for those reasons, you will never have one planning solution that dominates them all, right? So a big part of what we've been focusing on is like, okay, how do we find the right solution for the right client? Not only the right like I guess it's both things. It's what's the right software for you, and with that software, what's the right solution that you need. I know I might have gone off on a bit of a tangent there, but
No, certainly I think that is definitely, in line. I would say, like, when you have clients you're working with, and as you're kind of building solutions too, I think you guys are taking more of like an agnostic position, right? Where you're trying to find the right solutions for the right clients, not just, hey, we do XYZ only, here's XYZ, or else go find someone else, right? Like, you guys are very much willing to adapt to what the client's needs are.
Exactly. I'm willing to hand them off to other services providers if it's appropriate too. And I think that's something that there's not enough folks in the services industry right now who will actually hand you off to someone else if that's the right thing for you. Which, I mean, for business reasons, software companies going to want as much market share as they possibly can. But there are still some out there who are like, I think, doing a better job. This is what we do. This is what we're good at. And if you're not in this, if you don't meet these criteria, we're going to disqualify you. And we're not going to try and put a square peg in a round hole. And that's kind of what we're seeking out. Who is thinking about, who's putting the client first over their own top line.
Yeah, and I guess ultimately in that way too, the client just trusts you even more, right? Where you didn't send them down the wrong path, you didn't take their money and not deliver, right? You ended up getting them a true, real solution, even if it meant being a referral partner in that case.
Exactly. Because if we take a client down the wrong path, that ends up being a poor situation for everyone.
Mm-hmm. And I think we share very similar philosophies in that. Is like, ultimately we do good by the client, no matter if it's us taking the money or winning that business, or if it's really someone else. At the end of the day, a happy customer can only mean good things, right? So
absolutely.
Yeah. Now, as you kind of reflect back on, your journey, what is like one highlight over the last year that you would look back on from Openvale that you're just really proud of?
That's a good question. I think the biggest thing that over the past year, the most important kind of advancement that we've made is learning how to sell on our own. So doing, not only relying on word of mouth, not only relying on, referrals from different partners, but going out there, and you guys are doing the same thing with this podcast here, like building out content, providing value to the community in a more public way, doing outbound as well, going out there and pounding pavement. There are so many tools now that help you automate that your go-to-market approach in your activities, which is also driving a lot of that consolidation we were just talking about. That is so important. It takes a lot of investment of time and of energy, and also risk, because we had the beginning of this year was kind of scary. You feel like you're going through a bit of a trough, and you have to wait for those investments to start to pay off. But eventually they do start to pay off if you have a service and you have a product that people are interested in and you put the effort in. So we've seen that, and I think that's very important, because that ability to drive pipeline on our own allows us to be more objective than we would be if we're only operating through word of mouth, or if we're only operating through referrals. And that ultimately, I think, is the most freeing thing for us to kind of drive our vision and stay with our principles. If we have that ability to be self-sufficient on our own from a business development perspective.
It's just so funny. Like, I feel like, we're like mirror images right now, where I'm like, we're kind of in that similar place where we're really trying to distinguish who we are versus what we do, or who we do it for, right? And just kind of having that separation between, like, hey, we can go out, we're the trusted advisor, we're the ones that are approaching the clients, right? And we can really bring to them value and impact that we're not just an XYZ shop. We are really your trusted advisor. And I think that has been like a very similar takeaway from us, where we're kind of leading with that functional, expertise and solving problems and delivering solutions agnostically, right? And
Mhm.
then even with our partners, our technology partners that we work with, like Anaplan being one example, right? It kind of positions us in a higher light even with them, right? Where they see us as more credible, where we've already done 70% of the legwork of a deal, right? And then we're just going to bring them in to just finish it off.
I think it's a win-win, yeah, situation with the technology providers too. Some of them may feel a little bit uncomfortable because they're like, "Oh, you're going to do different things, or you're not going to be fully committed." But ultimately, that differentiates us as partners, right? And those client relationships are important, and that allows us to, you know, get more client relationships in general. And if their solution is the right one, and they can focus on the product, then the client volume will come to them naturally as long as the product is there. And I think we're seeing more kind of product led growth strategies with products. And I hope that becomes more of a thing with the planning space where the technology providers spend a little bit more time focusing on the product and improving it, a little bit less time on the sales and marketing because they have trusted partners and trusted advisors who will guide clients to them on their own.
Certainly. No, I'm curious from your take too, and I think each consultancy sort of has a different take on this. But
Mhm.
when it comes to planning solutions and just kind of strategy and just kind of working with between the functional and technical, there's really two ways I kind of like to describe it, right? You can pick an industry and go super deep into it, right? And do all of the functions like finance, HR, sales, etc. Or I guess you could really master one of the functions like finance and just go across different industries, right? So it's kind of breadth versus depth. What is your take on that balance, and how do you kind of see that playing out for Openvale?
Yeah, I lean a little bit more towards breadth because and we've seen this not only in planning. I think companies in search of in search of more efficiency to squeeze out have gone very deep on every function. And for that reason, you have all these specialists. You have revenue operations and recruiting operations and marketing operations and all these teams that are like, oh, we need to use the technology to scale. But I think we've reached the point where in many cases that is creating more harm than good. You've now added more resources, more fixed cost, more software because every little pod FP&A is part of this too. FP&A has their own software and whatnot, and it ends up being counterintuitive. And when you look at it from a CEO perspective, you're like, we've gone too deep in all these different areas, and we have not gone broad to look at things holistically, and we've over-indexed on these things. We're now at a 90-10 where we only needed an 80-20, and we have nothing over here. And we saw this all the time with Anaplan too, where you would get something really dialed in whatever team that you're working with, and then you'd go over to the next team over, and it would be a complete nightmare. And none of the work that you did here, none of the work that you do in FPA means anything if accounting is a complete mess. And we just saw that over and over and over again. Nothing you do in finance matters at all if your sales and marketing teams are not talking to each other and can't agree on what the definition of an SQL is. So we saw that over and over again. And that's why it's like this broad mindset where like you can solve problems across the board and then go deep where you need to. That's the approach that we've been kind of driving to more than going deep on one function. Going deep on industries makes sense, but going on functions, I think, less so.
Yeah, and that's, I think, similarly what we've found to be the case too. And I like completely echo your point where, we were working with certain clients and what we've seen where like if one team isn't talking to each other, that sort of it almost just defeats the point of like the connected planning vision that you're going to set out for, right? And I think early on it's a matter of like you really have to reflect and be like, okay, are we selling a point solution or are we selling the connected planning vision? Honestly, some customers might be fine with the point solution, and they're like, you know what, we don't like working with these other teams. We just want our one little thing. Let's just stick with that because of the politics or whatever the case is, right, internally. But if we're really trying to go for that connected planning vision, and I think it's really important to have all the stakeholders on board, right, and they can see the vision where, you know what, sales is driving the revenue forecast for FP&A, and here's how these two teams can work together. And then once we know how much revenue we're going to make, we can figure out our hiring plan for HR, right? And just kind of sell that connected planning vision dream, right?
For sure. And you bring up a great point. It's like, that's not right for everyone. I think in theory it is, right? But a lot of companies do just fine operating in silos, and they've just got it down. They're in a steady state. They have a good product, or they've got their market handled, and they just let it ride, and that's perfectly fine. And you don't want to disrupt that at all by introducing this whole new organizational strategy, right? But there are some situations where that connectivity is extremely important, right? Things like manufacturing, sales, and operations need to be tied at the hip because they're very real costs if those are not aligned. So that's kind of where we're focusing more, because some companies are like, yeah, you shouldn't, don't make this more complicated than you should. And I think that especially applies for like tech companies. Is like, you want your back office stuff to be as simple as possible so you can devote as much of your time and energy to your product and technology. You don't want to get too fancy on the finance, accounting, operation side.
Now, as kind of a trusted advisor, is there any advice you would give to, let's say, one of these platforms that are in the FP&A or connected planning space, I guess, that, we're in the real world, we're in the trenches, we see what's going on with the customers. Is there something you would like to see the industry as a whole kind of move towards?
I posted about this the other day. I would love to see more free trials. I think you see this with Salesforce, right? And they're trying to compete with the HubSpots and all the new, there are a million CRMs, right? Because I feel like go-to-market software usually leads the charge on these types of things. And that's where most of the competition is. We've picked up several go-to-market tools, software tools that I'd never heard of before the last 2 months. And they're incredible, honestly. And they're like $30 a month, and there's no contract. There's no 3-year commitment or anything like that. So the go-to-market software tools, because there are these product-led options coming out, these new entrants coming out, they force everyone to compete. So now even Salesforce is like, oh yeah, you can have a free trial and sign up, one user for $20 if you want. I would like to see that in the FP&A space, or in the planning space generally, not just FP&A. But we're seeing more and more entrants now. I've seen maybe one that actually does a free trial that actually lets you use the tool beforehand. As a services provider or a customer, that feels very risky and very opaque, right? I'm going to sign up for a 3-year contract with this solution that I've only seen in demos, or I've only seen a POC that was built by someone else that I didn't have access to too. That seems like, back in the day when everybody had year-long contracts on their phones, that seems like an outdated mode. It doesn't seem like that is an outdated mode of contractor relationship with the customer, and I hope that evolves to be more customer-friendly over time.
Yeah, that would be pretty amazing to see if we were able to see more free trials. I know that's something, even as a consumer of some of these technologies myself, like I've always appreciated just being able to have a free trial and test it out for myself, like see if this is a fit for me. And I think naturally, like if a customer likes it, they'll be willing to give you their hard-earned money,
Anaplan had that too with that 90. They had like a 90-day model. It was more of like a training type of thing, but that's how you create champions, by opening up the platform to people, allowing them to use it themselves, and then they internally sell it. So that I think is an area of opportunity. And now that everybody knows how planning tools work, I haven't seen anything where it's like, oh, this is IP that you shouldn't show anyone else because nobody's ever done it before. It's fairly commoditized now. Now it's like, who will make their platform most accessible for people to learn and adopt?
Yeah, certainly. Well, Caleb, it's been great having this chat and conversation. I guess to wrap things up, is there anything you would wish to leave our audience with? Just general state of the universe, any piece of advice you'd like to leave them with as we wrap up?
Well, there's a lot going on right now. I would say that, the silver lining of everything that's going on right now, it's just a very good time to be in this space. Companies are facing immense uncertainty, immense challenges, adapting in real time, and they need the internal advisors, they need external advisors, they need the right tools to help them manage through all this, general volatility. So, it's on us to kind of figure out the right tools to use and figure out how to navigate it. But it's a fun space to be in, and more important than this. These are the times where what we do is the most important. So I think in that sense, it's a very exciting time.
All right. Well, Caleb, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great having this chat, and always great to catch up with you. And wish you all the best, and congratulations again on all your success.
Thanks. Appreciate it.